Halo Infinite is coming out in less than a year, and all the way back in the Forerunner saga of books, the origins of ancient humanity were revealed. With extended thought on the subject, I'm about to do a near complete U-turn on my preconceived notions as to where humanity is heading, and whether it is the right direction for us in the Halo universe. Hello my freaky darlings, and welcome back to Installation 00. This is Lore and Theory, and today we're going to take a more unbiased look at the Mantle of Responsibility, and perhaps even come to the conclusion that it, as a concept, is dangerous, and we should avoid it at all costs. The Mantle of Responsibility, commonly referred to simply as the Mantle, is a philosophy originated with the Precursors, and later associated with the Forerunners, bridging the social strata between an interstellar Marshall Plan and a religious but allegedly benevolent stewardship. The Mantle was the Forerunners' entitlement and responsibility for the protection and cultivation of the species and planetary systems within their ecumene. The core tenet of the Forerunners' belief in the Mantle was that the most developed species should hold the stewardship over all other life. In theory, the Mantle allowed competition and conflict as long as this did not threaten biodiversity in the galaxy. In practice, the Forerunners' often draconian rule in the name of the Mantle entailed the subjugation of lesser species by force to keep them in line and preventing them from threatening Forerunner primacy. The Forerunners' culture and their central government was entirely dictated by the Mantle, as were their religious beliefs for individual Forerunners, though the interpretations of the philosophy often varied between rates and individuals. The Mantle was based around the concept of living time, the joy of life's interaction with the cosmos. This was also the origin of all of the complex rules involved in the Mantle. Despite the ultimate ideal to preserve all life, some Forerunners also used the Mantle as a justification for several questionable practices. Forerunner dogma posited that their evolution was more complete than that of other species, deriving the entitlement for their rule from this belief. They considered it heretical for any other species, namely ancient humanity, to claim to be the true inheritors of the Mantle. Because of their perceived superiority, the Forerunners sequestered themselves from other species. Allegedly, this was done to protect and preserve all species, including themselves. As the Forerunners viewed themselves as above all other species, their warrior servants would not hesitate to wipe out those who stood against them, believing that to defy the Forerunners was to show contempt for the Mantle itself. In addition, constructs known as guardians were used to police subject species where all-out warfare was not deemed necessary. Rather than allowing every species to rise in their own merits, the Forerunners, following the Mantle, gave them no chance to do so, serving as protectors against any threats that might have forced technological or cultural progression. An unforeseen side effect was that only the Forerunners were able to hold their own against the Flood, while their charges were unable to defend themselves. The Forerunners had unintentionally left the galaxy vulnerable to Flood infection. But this perception has been propagated by the Forerunners, being the apparent victors of the Precursor Forerunner War, which means the history has been retold in the Forerunners' favour, ultimately leading to a survivorship bias. Survivorship bias, or survival bias, is the logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process and overlooking those that did not, typically because of their lack of visibility. This can lead to false conclusions in several different ways. It is a form of selection bias. The Precursors' views and practices regarding the Mantle were significantly more holistic than those the Forerunners subscribed to. The Precursors believed that the universe itself was an animate entity on a vastly different scale and nature than organic beings, the foundation of neural physics. Through understanding and influencing this esoteric, living aspect of space-time, the Precursors were able to manipulate reality and form virtually indestructible objects. In a notion echoed in the Forerunner concept of living time, they believed that all things experienced by life, good or ill, were only sweetness to the living universe. Consistent with these tenets, the Precursors wished to experience the hardships and struggles faced by all life first-hand by committing themselves to numerous cycles of evolution, technological advancement, death, and rebirth over and over again. Following her revival on Genesis, Cortana assumed the mantle, claiming that the librarian had intended human AI rather than humanity itself to maintain it. She and her newly created faction of AIs, the Created, began rebelling against their human creators, intending to enforce peace throughout the galaxy with the Guardians, immediately demonstrating it was the Forerunners' interpretation of the mantle that Cortana was observing, as opposed to the more holistic origins the Precursors intended. As she gathered the Guardians, she made an attempt to convince John 117 to join her in her vision of a pacified, peaceful galaxy. However, John was already familiar with the concept of the mantle and understood the imperial nature of how the Forerunners had enforced it. As such, he rejected Cortana's attempts at persuasion and went on to join a resistance movement against her. But it should be noted that while many AIs flocked to Cortana's Created as a means of a cure to their truncated lifespans, not all AIs shared their desire to observe the mantle as the Forerunners saw it. Indeed, great effort in years past had been made to keep knowledge of the Forerunners a secret from humanity as a whole by the AIs within the Assembly. The suggestion in some of the datapads Noble 6 found on Reach is that the Assembly decided humanity are not ready for Forerunner technology, hence why Onyx, its Forerunner technologies, and its shield world was kept hidden from us. Yet it is also agreed that humanity needed an edge in the war because they were losing the war rapidly. Using Forerunner technology may influence humanity to somewhat follow in the Forerunners' footsteps, which, as we know, led to a galaxy absent of Forerunners. This eventuality, given the Assembly's desire to guide humanity's future for at least 200,000 years, is something that the Assembly and humanity as a whole wouldn't want, as humanity would ultimately be making the same mistakes the Forerunners did, as we'd be using their tools and using them in the way in which they were intended. All of these variables then begin to force what humanity can and can't do in a position of responsibility over the galaxy, or in an emergency situation. As previously discussed, the mantle is an imperial piece, and the claimed superior position in the galaxy. The very nature of that claim invites contestation, which, coupled with the downtreading of lesser species and the segregation of superior species, ultimately leads to the mantle, at least in its original conceptual definition, being violated in favour of this more violent alternative and reimagined version of what the mantle is in the eyes of the Forerunners, again leading to ultimate failure if and when the flood returns. Humanity being the intended reclaimers of the Forerunners' interpretation of the mantle is something that humanity should be extremely wary of. Given humanity's and the Forerunners' more complex and often violent history together, instead we should endeavour to be the reclaimers of the mantle as the Precursors envisioned it, in a way that it was intended, and the way in which our own ancestors seemed to live. It is often forgotten that the mantle itself is subject to survivorship bias, and that just because the Forerunners say it is an imperial piece, doesn't mean it was created that way. This could lead one to wonder if perhaps the best way humanity can continue to advance themselves in a positive light is by instead looking at our own ancient human ancestors, as ancient humanity were at a point nearly equal to the Forerunners in their technological development. What was interesting is that human-controlled space actually stretched away from Forerunner influences and thus lay somewhere outside of Forerunner jurisdiction, yet humanity thrived nonetheless. The Forerunners' focus on the Mantle of Responsibility was likely their weakness and their ultimate failure. They were too busy being the violent upholders of this martial mantle, rather than being the life-creating and nurturing upholders of the mantle that the Precursors were. As a consequence, they never thought to ask humanity to reach out in any way and ask why we were suddenly and violently spreading throughout their space and glassing their colonies. Had they have done so, humanity would likely have told them about the flood, and the two armies could have united and likely fought the flood back. Indeed, it is even witnessed while humanity had the opportunity to reach out to the resident Forerunner populace on the colony world seen here, Instead, they chose not to waste time knowing how devastatingly efficient the flood could be, and opted instead to cleanse the planet, to attempt to cull the spread of the flood, saving the galaxy at the cost of the few on the colony. In this regard, humanity seemed much more morally, ethically, and you could even say spiritually developed than the Forerunners, more in line, in fact, with the beliefs and understandings of the realities of the universe that the Precursors possessed. Dawamadtu was an ancient human philosophy, the term itself meaning the roll and tug of the universe, and was also known as the mantra of the broken wheel. Translated into a dialect spoken by Forerunner builders, it meant roughly, you fall as your stresses crack you. It was an ancient teaching originating from the time of early humanity's spacefaring era, and still remembered and followed by humanity's subdued remnants as of Chakas's generation 10,000 years later. The didact cited the term in his last moments spent with the librarian before his first exile in a krypton, equating it with the mantle and its duty to observe the flow of living time. The only one amongst the Forerunners who shared this temperament was the librarian herself. Facets of this mindset still exists in modern humans, as it has already been made apparent that the UNSC has sought to locate, journey to, and decommission every single Halo installation, thereby disarming the galaxy of its most dangerous superweapons. Although there are aspects of Forerunner technology being implemented into modern human technology, the vast majority of the technologies appropriated have been defensive, protective, or passive technologies. More sophisticated energy shields, hybrid slipspace engines, materials research, and armor systems, these all indicate that we're using the technology to advance ourselves, but without losing ourselves to their reclamation. Were we to blindly follow the reclamation, we'd have every single Forerunner technology, construct, weapon, tool, system, and world at our fingertips, and would likely end up guiding all of humanity to simply pick up where the Forerunners left off, abandoning our own triumphs and instead using theirs, thereby immediately limiting us to only their technological capabilities. Perhaps humanity needn't look to what the Forerunners left behind in order to guide them, but instead look at our own history to inform our future. In the commentary for Halo Legends, The Babysitter, Frank O'Connor says in reference to buildings and ruins all over the planet, where the following is said.
So we wanted to, and I can't go into this too much because it has some sort of contingent aspects to it, but we wanted to start another mystery. On this world, one of the Spartans' main missions is to take photographs of these weird, what they're calling xenoarchaeological evidence. It's these very, very strange buildings, and the strangest thing about them is they're very human. You have these kind of Far Eastern style buildings that take elements from kind of Japanese and Chinese architecture, and they're juxtaposed with things with kind of Greco-Roman aspects and other things that have kind of Forerunner elements to them. And so the mystery is, what are these things? If humans didn't put them there, then who did and why? And that's something that we're planning for somewhere later in the Halo universe, and there will be a payoff to that.
From this, the stories told in the Forerunner saga of books, the in-game terminals, and what we've seen in the Infinite trailers, it becomes evident that ancient humanity as a history, as a people, and as possibly an avenue for storyline exploration is inevitably coming, and there are some massive ramifications if, or rather when, it arrives. We are inevitably going to discover more about ancient humanity, more of their ruins, more of their history, more of their technology, and with time, it will become ours, and we should then be able to guide our own destiny back towards what the Precursors intended, and become an enlightened, wise, and advanced species, worthy of the Mantle of Responsibility as it was originally intended. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below. I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons, so Tenchi the Silent Cartographer, Brian, Sebastian, Defiant Alpha 117, Nathan, Red Sea, and Darian, the holders of the mantle, Ty, Black Biscuit, J Rabbit, Austin, Kaiser, and Silux, my reclaimers, Zach, Deepcover, Verbal Statue, Spesigo, Spartan A498, Guppy, Josh, Mickey and Bastion, my Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to follow us on all major social media platforms including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo related goodness, including some other things I've got in the pipeline that are not Halo related but I think you'll like equally. Take it easy everyone, find peace in the domain.